So the federal government is talking about releasing federal lands that they hold and turning them over to try and solve the affordable housing crisis that the United States is under. Now, I'm looking at this as a resident and a real estate practitioner in the state of California. My first problem with this, and while I like the idea of unused federal land being used to build housing, because we do have a housing shortage, and in this case, what people are talking about is a shortage of affordable housing, it seems to reason that using federal lands to solve this would be ideal. Anytime the government gets involved in a project, whether it's federal, state, or even your local government, there always seems to be a lot more red tape, regulations, and costs added to whatever project that is. In the case of really being able to solve an issue and make headwinds, in the case of finally being able to get closer to solving the issue and make some headwinds, I really think that we should consider involving the private sector more heavily in getting the government bodies to back off. Now, hear me out. From the federal level, they're talking right now they're going to assign these lands to HUD. But when HUD gets it, we're going to have not only the GSA, which is the General Services Administration, and the DOI, which is Department of Interior. In no particular order, we have the issues of one, identifying the lands, deciding if it's going to be turned over to state or not. And before it is, they're going to decide what kind of project they want to see built on it. HUD is going to end up, like usual, using grants and subsidies. This is going to cut out any free market availability, and it's going to, well, basically survive on the entitlement aspect of developing the land. And then, of course, the next problem is HUD is going to insert their own regulations, which is going to make the environment less competitive and less efficient than it otherwise could be. From there, once these properties are generally going to be identified, it goes to the GSA. The biggest problem with GSA is they are notoriously slow. Things that you and I think could be resolved in a couple of weeks usually takes them a couple of years. This is approving who the land goes to, which state, which part of the state, who's going to be in charge on the state level. The next problem is they're also the first people that put so many restrictions on being able to build with an innovative approach. It's just going to be the same old tired, that we may run into cost efficiencies there as well. So we're only on layer 2. So from there, we have the DOI, the Department of Interior, which is, if you think about it, I think they only exist at this point to come up with environmental reasons why something can't be built. Now, none of us want the environment destroyed, but we are talking completely unnecessary and overburdening regulations that typically take something that could be developed and make it sit dormant with no work happening. Now remember, when no work is happening, not only are we not getting closer to solving the problem we set out to solve, in this case, affordable housing, but also nobody's working. That means all those opportunities for employment, from the construction to the back house, to paper filing, to anything you can think of that goes into building a community, doesn't start. Just vacant land. It doesn't make anybody work. It doesn't produce any income. So after we get through all of those hurdles, where we've already made it more expensive and time consuming and less innovative than it could, it would hypothetically be turned over to the state. And in my case, that would be the state of California, which is where the real fun begins. When most people think of California, they're thinking about beaches and mountains and palm trees. I think regulation. My favorite is the California Housing Finance Agency, known as HFA. So you know what they like to do? They start with distributing tax credits. In this case, the state is picking the winners and losers of this development deal, and even who ends up in the properties at the end. They also are very famous for attaching so many restrictions to the funding of said projects and properties that they become unfeasible because they're not affordable to develop and turn a profit on. In fact, Even a break even is often not possible. Then you have the Department of Housing and Community Development. Now, this one likes to enforce regulations on building that not only increases the costs, but also the time frame in order to get a project up off the ground, let alone completed. And of course, because they want to keep themselves employed, they really prefer the government-backed developments as opposed to moving things to the private sector. This is a group of people that will always fight to keep things in the government so that the private sector is not involved. Because if the private sector took over, well, there wouldn't be as much work for them to do. Then we have the California Environmental and Land Use Agency. This one's quick. Not only do they add more regulations to an overly regulated project, but they're also famous for taking so long that the properties never get developed as well. So how many layers do we have that not only adds time and expense, making these projects completely impossible to build that would turn any profit for the people doing it, but are also going to delay it so long that it never solves the problem? So all of these are just getting us out of the statewide regulations and bodies. Then we have all of your local government. Now, I like local government for the most part because this is often the last man standing that prevents, well, let's take areas in Southern California by me that went through the horrific fires where entire cities were effectively lost in the beginning of January of 2025. You have neighborhoods that have charm. They've existed for decades this way. And people want to rebuild in that same sort of vein. But there is going to be pressure to take these sprawled out communities that we'd call charming with, mature tree growth and really nice architecture and convert them into modern high density housing, thus ruining the entire neighborhood. Now, your local municipalities are ones that can help prevent that, but they are also the same ones that push anytime lots open up in areas that are, let's say, suburbia, where we have single family homes and maybe some condos and some shopping centers, and we've gotten used to the amount of traffic we have, and you like your kids going to school there. They're also the first ones that push to try and be able to build high density, affordable housing right next to what used to be high-end homes. Now, we all want to solve the problem of everybody being able to afford a place to live. But for people who have bought, in my case, let's say $1 million home, which just a decade ago would have been considered a mid-level or even a starter home, they don't want their neighborhoods turned into high-density housing because it increases traffic and very often crime goes up. We don't have the infrastructure to support that many people living in a particular area. The roads get clogged, the shopping gets clogged, and sometimes it even forces businesses out. So here's one of the biggest problems with delaying doing this, where we can't get the property assigned and the idea written and approved quickly in order to develop because costs change. Well, Jeff, yes, of course they change. Well, no, I want you to think about this. I sit you down right now and I tell you, look, you're going to host 100 people for a full meal. You're going to provide appetizers, drinks, salads, the main course, dessert, coffee, the whole 9 yards. And the menu has to be top tier. And there has to be multiple choices. Let's say 5 different choices for a main dish for 100 people. But you have to go through getting the venue approved now. You have to get the tablecloths, the seating, everything approved now. And you have to commit to how much it's going to cost you to feed the 100 people. You got to think of all the ingredients, all the food costs. You've got to commit to all the pricing now, but you're not holding the dinner for 10 years. What do you think happens 10 years from now? Do you think it'll be more or less expensive to feed 100 people? I mean, if you're watching just as simple as egg prices right now, you already know it's more expensive now than it was even 2 years ago. So how are you supposed to competitively and responsibly come up with not only the game plan of what you want to build, but also what it's going to cost you to do so when we have no idea what the price of not only labor, but also the materials are going to be at the time you're finally able to start building? You're going to have a project that's underwater years before it even starts being built. So again, we're just throwing away money on things without solving the problem. So if our goal is to take these lands and be able to not only solve or at least put a dent into the affordability crisis, but also just the housing crisis in general, we need to be able to move quickly, and we need people to build homes that people actually want. And who better to do that than the private sector? The private sector can not only move faster, employ better workers, but they're also more innovative in doing things. Anytime you turn things over to a private industry, they have to put their rear end on the line in order to make sure that they stay profitable, which of course is not only dollars and cents, but it's also time. It's in their interest to move quickly. And the faster we move, the faster we can have people move into these homes. But also, they're not able to sell anything if what they make is something nobody wants. Nike has this figured out. If they make a shoe nobody buys, they stop making that shoe. They do market research to figure out what is going to be a bestseller and satisfy the needs of the most people. We need them to do the same thing with housing. I don't think we have a clear answer of whether the federal government is toying with the idea of just giving the land to the states or if they're planning on selling it to the states. But either way, it shouldn't remain in the states' hands. The states should decide in general what kind of projects they want built on these said lands and open it up to U.S. companies in order to bid on the property and take over the land and the project as a whole, all on their own dime. This will allow these companies to continue to increase employment and wages and also incentivize a unique way of approaching the problem and ends up with a result that actually serves the needs of the most people. This is both with innovation and cost, because every area we're looking at developing is going to be different. We need to look at those not under we just need apartments, or we just need single family homes built in a planned unit development where they're going to be forever rentals. I don't know if you've seen these where you are, but in my area, there are more developments going up that look like single family homes, but they're never for sale. They're owned by a corporation that comes in, they have the land, they build this really nice looking community, and then they continue to run and own that community forever. You can only rent the homes, the rental communities, basically apartment buildings that are single family homes. Now, this solves some problems, especially in the rental market, but those properties will never come on market. We won't see that usual where a family moves in, raises their kids, and when they become empty nesters, put the home on the market, maybe move out of state, maybe move into a bigger home, a smaller home. That'll never happen because the corporation still owns the home. In fact, they own the entire community. That also means that if you move into one of these and you plan on staying there forever, you can't will or your children can't inherit the property, which means we cut off that generational head start that we all were hoping to give to our kids. So I want to see the availability of more things that the private individual, the private family can actually own and call their own and do with what they want. This is how the economy is supposed to work. It is supposed to be fueled by private citizens, private companies, not where the government controls and dictates and does everything. I don't know. What do you think?